There is a story that almost nobody hears. A story so unbelievable that if it happened in a movie, people would call it unrealistic. Yet tonight, there is a reason you were guided to this message. Because the moment you are about to hear is not about a wedding. It is not about a bride. It is not about a groom. It is about a confession. One confession so powerful that it changed the course of two destinies forever. And before this story ends, you may realize that it is connected to your own life in a way you never expected. So don't skip. Don't rush. Because the final revelation changes everything. Imagine this. A beautiful wedding venue. Flowers everywhere. Music softly filling the air. Hundreds of guests sitting in anticipation. Families smiling. Friends taking pictures. Everyone believing they are about to witness the happiest moment of two people's lives. The bride was ready. The groom was ready. Everything had gone exactly according to plan. For months they had prepared. For months they had convinced themselves that this was the future they wanted. But what nobody knew was that deep inside one of them, a storm had been growing. A storm hidden behind smiles. A storm hidden behind photographs. A storm hidden behind the words, "I'm fine." Because sometimes people can spend years pretending. Sometimes people can convince everyone around them. Sometimes they can even convince themselves. But the heart knows. The heart always knows. And on that day, just minutes before the ceremony began, something happened. Someone arrived. Not with flowers. Not with gifts. Not with an invitation. They arrived carrying only the truth. The truth that had remained buried for years. The truth that was never supposed to be spoken. The truth that had the power to destroy everything. Or save everything. Nobody expected the conversation. Nobody expected the tears. Nobody expected the confession. And certainly nobody expected what happened next. Because after hearing those words, your soulmate walked away from their own wedding. But what was said? What kind of confession could make someone abandon a future they spent years building? The answer begins years earlier. Long before the wedding. Long before the engagement. Long before anyone started talking about forever. There were two souls. Two people who crossed paths during an ordinary moment. A moment that seemed insignificant at the time. One conversation. One glance. One unexpected connection. Yet something happened. Something neither of them could explain. A feeling. A strange familiarity. As if they had met before. As if their souls recognized each other. Even though their minds could not. The connection frightened them. Because real connections often do. Real connections force us to become vulnerable. Real connections expose the parts of ourselves we spend years hiding. And so they drifted apart. Life happened. Circumstances changed. Opportunities were missed. Words were left unspoken. Years passed. And eventually they found themselves living completely separate lives. Or so they thought. Because destiny has a strange way of working. Sometimes two people are separated not because they are meant to be apart, but because they are meant to learn lessons first. Lessons about love. Lessons about loss. Lessons about themselves. And while one soul was moving through life, trying to forget a connection that never fully disappeared, the other was doing exactly the same thing. Neither of them knew it. Neither of them could see it. But they were carrying each other in silence. Years later, one of them got engaged. Everyone celebrated. Everyone congratulated them. Everyone believed they had found their perfect match. But deep down, something felt missing. Not wrong. Just incomplete. Like reading a story with the final chapter torn out. Like hearing a melody missing its last note. Like standing at a door that never fully opens. Still, they ignored the feeling. Because logic said everything was perfect. The relationship looked perfect. The future looked perfect. The plans looked perfect. But appearances can be deceiving. And the closer the wedding day came, the louder the silence inside them became. Have you ever noticed how the truth becomes impossible to ignore when a major decision approaches? The heart starts asking questions. The soul starts searching. The universe starts placing signs in unexpected places. And that is exactly what happened. Dreams began appearing. Memories resurfaced. Old emotions returned. Coincidences became impossible to dismiss. The name they hadn't thought about in years suddenly appeared everywhere. Songs. Conversations. Random encounters. Social media. Even strangers seemed to mention things connected to the past. It felt as if life itself was trying to get their attention. Trying to tell them something. Trying to warn them. But they pushed forward. Because the wedding was already planned. The invitations had been sent. The venue was booked. The families were involved. There was no turning back. Or so they believed. Then came the day. The day that changed everything. The wedding morning arrived. The sun rose. Guests gathered. Photographers prepared. Everyone smiled. Yet inside, a battle was raging. A battle between certainty and truth. A battle between expectation and destiny. And then, the confession happened. A person from the past appeared unexpectedly. Not to stop the wedding. Not to create drama. Not to beg for love. They came for one reason. Honesty. For years they had carried a secret. For years they had hidden their feelings. For years they had convinced themselves it was too late. But seeing the wedding announcement shattered something inside them. Because some truths refuse to stay buried forever. And so they spoke. Their voice trembled. Their hands shook. Tears filled their eyes. And they said the words they had been holding back for years. I tried to forget you. I tried to move on. I tried to convince myself that what I felt wasn't real. But no matter where life took me, no matter who I met, no matter how much time passed, my heart never left you. Silence. Complete silence. The kind of silence that changes everything. Because sometimes one sentence contains years of emotion. Years of longing. Years of regret. Years of love. And in that moment, something awakened. Something that had been sleeping. Something that had been waiting. Memories flooded back. The conversations. The laughter. The connection. The feeling that no one else had ever been able to replace. Suddenly everything made sense. The doubts. The dreams. The signs. The strange emptiness. It was never fear of marriage. It was never uncertainty about the future. It was the soul recognizing that the wrong story was about to be written. And then came the question. The question that changed destiny. The question nobody expected. The question that shattered every illusion. If today was your last day on earth, would you still walk down that aisle? The answer arrived instantly. Before logic could interfere. Before fear could speak. Before expectations could take control. The answer came directly from the heart. And the answer was no. That single realization changed everything. Because for the first time in years, they stopped listening to what everyone else wanted. And started listening to themselves. The hardest thing in life is not finding love. The hardest thing is recognizing it when it appears. Because real love doesn't always arrive at the right time. Real love doesn't always follow the plan. Real love doesn't always make sense. Yet when it is real, it never truly disappears. Minutes later, guests began noticing something strange. The ceremony wasn't starting. People whispered. Confusion spread. Questions filled the room. Where was the bride? Where was the groom? Why was everything delayed? Nobody knew. Nobody could have guessed. Because while hundreds of people waited outside, a life-changing decision was being made behind closed doors. A decision that required enormous courage. The courage to disappoint people. The courage to face judgment. The courage to choose truth over comfort. And eventually, the door opened. What happened next stunned everyone. The wedding was cancelled. Just like that. Years of planning ended in a single moment. Gasps echoed throughout the venue. Families were shocked. Friends were speechless. Some people were angry. Others were confused. Many couldn't understand. But understanding wasn't necessary. Because for the first time in years, the soul felt free. Free from pretending. Free from expectations. Free from a future that didn't belong to them. And that freedom changed everything. Now here is the part that nobody talks about. The part that makes this story unforgettable. Walking away wasn't the miracle. The confession wasn't the miracle. The miracle was what happened afterward. Because once truth entered the story, life began rearranging itself in impossible ways. Opportunities appeared. Doors opened. Healing happened. Conversations that should have occurred years earlier finally took place. And little by little, two paths that had drifted apart began finding each other again. Not because destiny forced them. Not because magic solved everything. But because honesty created a new beginning. A beginning that could never exist while lies remained in control. And maybe that is why you found this story today. Maybe it isn't about a wedding. Maybe it isn't about soulmates. Maybe it is about a truth inside your own heart. A truth you have been avoiding. A truth you already know. Because somewhere in your life there may be a decision waiting to be made. A conversation waiting to happen. A chapter waiting to close. Or a chapter waiting to begin. The greatest tragedy is not losing someone. The greatest tragedy is losing yourself while trying to keep everyone else happy. That is why this confession mattered. That is why this story mattered. Because one honest moment accomplished what years of pretending never could. And now for the final revelation. The emotional confession did not destroy a life. It saved one. The cancelled wedding was not an ending. It was a beginning. The tears were not signs of failure. They were signs of awakening. And the soulmate who walked away from their own wedding that day did not lose their future. They finally found it. Because destiny does not reward perfection. Destiny rewards truth. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is walk away from the life everyone expects. So they can walk toward the life their soul has been calling them to all along. If this story found you tonight, remember this. The heart can stay silent for years. But when the moment arrives, when the truth finally speaks, everything changes. And sometimes one emotional confession is enough to rewrite an entire destiny forever. After the wedding was cancelled, everyone believed the story was over. They were wrong. In reality, the most unbelievable chapter had not even begun. Because walking away from a wedding is one thing. Living with the consequences is something entirely different. The news spread quickly. Friends talked. Families argued. People took sides. Some called it selfish. Some called it foolish. Others called it the biggest mistake of a lifetime. Everywhere they went, whispers followed. Questions followed. Judgment followed. And during those difficult days, there were moments when they wondered if everyone else was right. Maybe they had destroyed their future. Maybe they had thrown away something good in pursuit of a fantasy. Maybe they had listened to their heart when they should have listened to logic. The doubts were relentless. Day after day. Night after night. But then something strange started happening. For years, life had felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. Now those missing pieces began appearing one after another. It wasn't dramatic at first. Just small things. Tiny moments. Unexpected signs. The kind of moments most people would overlook. Yet together they created a pattern that could no longer be ignored. One evening, while sitting alone and questioning everything, an old photograph unexpectedly fell from a forgotten book. A photograph connected to a memory they hadn't thought about in years. The memory of the person whose confession had changed everything. The next morning, a song began playing in a cafe. A song connected to that same person. A song that carried emotions they thought were long gone. Then came another coincidence. And another. And another. Until coincidence no longer felt like coincidence. It felt like something bigger. Something guiding them. Something trying to show them that the decision they made was not a mistake. Meanwhile, the person who had made the confession was going through their own battle. They weren't celebrating. They weren't expecting miracles. In fact, they felt terrified. For years they had carried their feelings in silence. Now the truth was exposed. There was nowhere left to hide. No walls left to stand behind. No excuses left to protect them. They had risked everything. And now all they could do was wait. Wait to see whether destiny would finally bring their paths together. Or separate them forever. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And during that time, both souls learned something important. Love is not proven by dramatic words. Love is proven by courage. Anyone can speak about love when everything is easy. Anyone can make promises when there is nothing to lose. But real love? Real love appears when honesty becomes uncomfortable. When vulnerability becomes terrifying. When walking away would be easier than staying. That is when the truth reveals itself. One rainy evening, something happened that neither of them expected. A message arrived. A simple message. Just a few words. Yet those few words carried enough emotion to change everything. I keep thinking about what happened. That was it. Nothing dramatic. Nothing complicated. Yet behind those words lived years of unspoken feelings. The response came minutes later. I do too. For the first time in a very long time, neither of them was hiding. Neither of them was pretending. Neither of them was running. The conversation continued. Hours passed. Then another conversation. Then another. Every message uncovered memories. Every conversation revealed truths. Every moment brought them closer to understanding something they had missed years ago. They were never separated because they lacked love. They were separated because they lacked timing. And timing changes everything. Many people spend their lives believing that love alone is enough. But love without growth often fails. Love without healing often collapses. Love without timing often disappears before it has a chance to become what it was meant to be. Years earlier, they were not ready. Years earlier, fear was stronger than faith. Years earlier, uncertainty was louder than truth. But now? Everything was different. Life had transformed them. Pain had transformed them. Experience had transformed them. And because of that transformation, they could finally see each other clearly. Not through fantasy. Not through obsession. Not through unrealistic expectations. But through truth. And the truth was beautiful. Yet destiny had one more test waiting. One final challenge. One final revelation. Because just when everything seemed to be falling into place, an unexpected secret emerged. A secret neither of them knew. A secret connected to the past. Years ago, before they drifted apart, one of them had written a letter. A letter filled with emotions they never had the courage to say aloud. A letter explaining everything. Every feeling. Every dream. Every hope. Every fear. But the letter was never delivered. Somehow it disappeared. Lost before it could reach its destination. Lost before it could change the future. Lost before it could prevent years of separation. Or so everyone thought. One afternoon, while helping a family member clean old storage boxes, that forgotten letter was discovered. Still sealed. Still unopened. Still carrying words written years earlier. Words frozen in time. When the letter was finally read, tears filled both their eyes. Because every sentence proved the same thing. The connection had always been real. Even before the confusion. Even before the distance. Even before the years apart. The feelings had existed from the beginning. The letter contained a sentence neither of them would ever forget. A sentence written long before the cancelled wedding. Long before the confession. Long before destiny intervened. It said, "If life ever takes us apart, I believe our souls will find their way back to each other." Those words shattered every remaining doubt. Because somehow, against impossible odds, that prediction had become reality. And suddenly everything made sense. The missed opportunities. The delays. The heartbreak. The waiting. The confusion. Every chapter had been leading to this moment. Not because life was punishing them. But because life was preparing them. Preparing them to recognize what truly mattered. Years later, when people asked about the wedding that never happened, the answer always surprised them. They never spoke with bitterness. They never spoke with regret. Instead, they smiled. Because they understood something most people never realize. Sometimes the greatest blessing arrives disguised as disappointment. Sometimes what feels like rejection is actually protection. Sometimes what looks like an ending is secretly a beginning. And sometimes the moment that appears to ruin everything becomes the moment that saves everything. The cancelled wedding taught them that. The confession taught them that. Life taught them that. And now, as you listen to this story, there may be a reason it feels familiar. Maybe not because you have experienced the exact same events. But because your soul understands the lesson. Perhaps there is something in your life that didn't happen the way you expected. A relationship. A dream. An opportunity. A plan. Something you once believed was meant for you. Something that disappeared. Something that left you wondering why. What if the answer is simpler than you think? What if the delay wasn't punishment? What if the loss wasn't failure? What if the closed door was protecting a future you couldn't yet see? The soulmate who walked away from their own wedding learned that destiny often works behind the scenes. While people panic. While people doubt. While people question everything. Destiny quietly continues arranging the pieces. And one day, without warning, the picture becomes clear. That is exactly what happened here. The confession that seemed dangerous became healing. The wedding that seemed perfect became unnecessary. The heartbreak that seemed unbearable became meaningful. And the future that seemed impossible became reality. Because truth always finds its way to the surface. No matter how deeply it is buried. No matter how much time passes. No matter how many obstacles stand in its path. Truth waits. Patiently. Quietly. Until the perfect moment arrives. Then it changes everything. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Your soulmate is not defined by convenience. Your soulmate is not defined by timing alone. Your soulmate is not defined by circumstances. The deepest connections survive distance. They survive silence. They survive fear. They survive years. Because what is meant to find you never forgets the way back. That is why the story did not end at the altar. It began there. The emotional confession was not the final chapter. It was the first page of a completely new story. A story written not by expectations. Not by pressure. Not by fear. But by honesty. And honesty has a strange power. It can destroy illusions in a single moment. But it can also create miracles. The miracle wasn't that someone walked away from their wedding. The miracle was that they finally walked toward their truth. And once they did, destiny met them halfway.